Welcome to The Writer Reads The Strays of Lunar One. This is Book 2, The Unwanted, Chapter 10, Arrival on Axis 58. Odyssey did not board, but Oliver watched the booster's system register the very thorough scan that swept through their hull. Not nice, he thought, but in line with all the rumours and what I've seen so far. Up until he'd bitten Lewis and then fled, Oliver had only had rumours to go on. Since then, it made him wonder what the company's interest would be in a rogue werewolf and his victim, and what part they played in enforcing Lunar One's laws. Or the rule of decency, he added to himself, putting the rumours together. And who'd have thought a luxury cruise company would have a vigilante arm? I guess someone came across one atrocity too many, he thought, watching the ship come within boarding distance. The intrusion of very two alert presences that entered the Squire's systems with Odyssey's first broadcast came as a surprise. Those unprincipled, sneaky sons of Oliver thought, keeping still as he tracked their movement. It didn't take him long to realize he needed to move, quickly, quietly, and without leaving a trace, if he didn't want to be found. He snagged some of their communications as he left. What was that? The question almost stopped him because it had come in very human tones. Software didn't. It just didn't ask questions like that. This communication was the sort of contact he and Lewis shared when they went into a system together. Alarm thrilled through him. They're using wet wires? Well, crap. And he didn't stop to watch their progress. Instead, he threw down a screening program between himself and the two intruders, and then threw 3 more when he reached a junction in the programming. One of those screens covered his true path. The other 2 suggested he might have had friends who needed to cover their own trails as well. On the upside, the Odyssey wet wires took an exception to the more obvious Ravelin intrusions. Let's not leave this here, one suggested, when she found the tap into the booster's navigation system. You know, one day they're going to do something the Federation can't ignore, was said in such tones of frustration that Oliver almost laughed. What was that? Had him holding his net presence as still as he could make it. What? That ripple. Oh, heck, Oliver thought, and created several more ripples as he fled through the system, taking a few side trips into some of the ship's busier systems before sliding back into the tank and isolating its connection from the ship proper. He had the fleeting sense of 2 very curious presences following him and caught their frustration when they lost his trail in the drive section because of something else Ravelin had left behind, but he didn't stop to check what it was. Something told him that if Odyssey caught him, he'd be left owing Nettles a lot more than he was willing to pay. As it was, he hoped he didn't give them reason to insist on going through the ship's system until they found him. And why do you think they would? He asked himself. You've isolated the tank. They wouldn't be able to find you. Because this is Odyssey, he replied, answering his own question, and I don't really know what they're capable of. That much was true, and the thought unsettled him. Until that point, he'd been assuming Odyssey would just like any other mercenary company, but using their cruise line company as cover. Now, he wasn't so sure. The wet wires sneaking into the system, and he was darn sure the captain hadn't sanctioned that. The battle cruiser fleeing their luxury liner. Those things pointed to there being more to the company than just mercenary activities in disguise. Why were they hunting him and Lewis for a start? It couldn't just be to keep Lewis safe and bring him to justice. Oliver caught himself reaching out to reconnect the system and pulled himself back into his own head. Firstly, because he'd know soon enough if they tracked into the tank. And secondly, he didn't want to help them do that. He couldn't even watch the captain talking to the sugar side since the disconnect prevented it from coming through. For one worrying moment he wondered if the feed was still trying to reach him, and if Odyssey would notice and trace it. There was only one way to check, and doing that would put him more at risk than waiting for the all clear from the captain, or trying to guess how long he needed to stay in isolation. What followed was one of the longest waits of his life. There was only so much time he could stay in his own head before his thoughts began to spiral into an unhelpful pattern. Would Odyssey come? Had Ravelin really gone? If Odyssey came, would they auction him to the highest bidder because of the crime he'd committed? Oliver pushed those thoughts away. They weren't constructive and might push him into a course of action he and Lewis would both regret. Instead, he focused on an old trick he'd learned on Ops with Crucible. He closed his eyes and pushed himself into a light sleep. A sharp, rhythmic knocking woke him, and he came to abrupt wakefulness, reaching for a blaster that wasn't there. The sudden movement registered as panic in the tank's sensors, triggering a warning sequence. Noticing it, Oliver stilled. The last thing he wanted was to be sedated, not when there were things he needed to attend to. The knocking came again. This time he listened, noting the sequence and translating it before he had time to wonder how a civilian ship knew Crucible's tap code. All clear. Connect. Contact required. All clear. Connect. Oliver reversed the disconnect he put in place. They're gone, the captain told him, coming through the connection and into his head. But it was close. Their wet wires alerted them to a possible presence in the system, and I'm not sure the Sugarsides bought my story about having one of my crewmen monitoring things. But they didn't push it, Oliver concluded, and sensed her quick approval. No, they didn't, she confirmed, and then they offered to escort us to Axis 58 and wished us a safe journey when we declined. And do we know if they left anything in the system? Oliver asked, and felt the captain's attention sharpen. I was hoping you'd be able to tell us that, she told him. The doc's bringing Lewis online as we speak. Like his beta was a machine. Oliver bristled. It's a turn of phrase, the captain assured him, and accurate. Well, he couldn't disagree with that. We make orbit in 5 days, the captain told him, and we don't break orbit for 3 more. If you need a ride out, you have my comms. Oliver was about to protest that he really didn't, when the relevant comm code appeared in his implant. Thank you, he managed, swallowing his surprise. Her tone turned serious. As I said, we've been in this business for a while, and we've contracted with Nettles before. Once we have dropped you, our current contract ceases. If you need us while we're in orbit or seek transport, we are available. And the price? Oliver asked. The captain gave him a small smile. The systems are due for a security check, and I suspect we'll owe you tank time, given our Nettles contract doesn't allow for delays. You can claim that any time. Oliver hadn't thought about what would happen if he and Lewis didn't have time to undergo the tank time they'd bought, and the no delay clause was unwelcome news. Thank you, he managed, just as Lewis's groggy contact reached him. Oliver? Bro? I'm here. I'll leave you to explain and let you get to work, the captain said, and her presence abruptly withdrew. What did she mean by that? By the time Oliver had explained, Lewis was wide awake and pushing to get into the job. Oliver grabbed hold of his presence before it could disappear into the ship. Doc? He asked, relieved when he could find her implant. He's fine for this kind of work if that's what you're asking, the doc replied. It would go faster if he slept, but we need the ship secured. And for Ravelin not to come back, Oliver thought, catching the echo of that consideration through their communication. The doc did not reply, and he breathed a sigh of relief. At least Carnelian's little mind-reading trick seemed limited to just himself. Although how he was going to fix that, Oliver didn't know. He let Lewis go and followed him. Let me know what you need me to do. You can start by not touching anything, his beta told him tartly, as if he needed to hear it. Oliver shook his head, smiling as he waited for Lewis's first set of orders. There were times when he was reminded of just how new a wolf his partner really was. Even if he outranked his alpha or huntmaster in his field, no wolf technician would speak that way to those higher in the hierarchy than he was. It took them the rest of the journey and a day in Axis 58 orbit to hunt down and deal with Ravelin's software and odysseys. Apparently, the cruise liner company respected no boundaries when it came to their assistance. We done? Oliver asked as he and Lewis finished dismembering a particularly well-hidden tracking program they'd found in the system for regulating the booster's drives. Lewis didn't answer straight away, but Oliver didn't press him. Instead, he watched as his beta ran through the systems, using the data detailing its original state to check against any alterations or additions to its programming. And then he ran a second program. This one linked to the booster's admin account to see what programs had recently been activated, or which had been added but remained dormant. Oliver watched and took notes. While he'd been fighting other people's battles on distant worlds, Lewis had been cutting his teeth in the IT security sector, and dividing his time between intrusion, counter-intrusion, and intrusion detection. It had taken Oliver months to convince him to take a side job, but once he had, the man had been hooked. And not just by the paycheck. There was only so much challenge his administrative post could offer, and Lewis liked a challenge. Oliver grimaced. Maybe not the challenge of almost being killed, but the other challenges, the ones of infiltrating a hostile system and exfiltrating what they'd been hired to fetch, and hiding the evidence they'd ever been. What? Lewis's abrupt question brought Oliver back to the present. Oliver shook his head. Nothing. Lewis scowled. It was something, all right, and I need you focused, so I'll only say this once. This is not your fault, and when we find a place to be, we'll find a way to get Odyssey off our backs. And Ravelin too? Oliver asked, only half teasing. Lewis's scowl grew deeper. Oh, yes, he replied darkly. We are going to deal with Ravelin. Oliver felt a slight shimmer of worry. When his beater got that look, someone was going to have a very bad day. But Ravelin? Somehow he didn't think the amount of trouble he'd gotten them into was going to compare to what Lewis had in mind. But not yet, right, bro? He asked, and was not comforted by Lewis's smirk. No. What is it you always say? Mission first, revenge later? Something like that, Oliver agreed, although he hadn't said that for a very long time. He indicated the surrounding programs. We good? Way to change the subject, bro, Lewis snarked. But yeah, we're as done as I can see. Whoever they hired to secure the ship was good, and Ravelin didn't have the time or access they needed to get anywhere tricky. Oliver nodded. Captain's got her head locked down tight. And Odyssey arrived. Lewis snorted. I guess that's one thing we can thank them for. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have been put in that situation, Oliver reminded his beater. Don't go being too grateful. The captain met them when they returned to their own heads, or her message did. Ping me when you're ready to be released. Your transport's awaiting and Nettles has made his first contact. Oliver wondered what she hadn't told them, and then how much trouble he and Lewis were in. None, as it turned out. The captain had that covered too. I told them you were researching the target, she explained when they emerged from their tanks, and I have a research team on standby to do exactly that while you're scrubbing down and kitting up. She clapped a hand on Oliver's still damp shoulder before handing him a dressing gown and guiding him from the compartment. The bio section was spotless, and whatever the stench had been that had bothered Ravelin's team, it no longer lingered. She took them to a small cabin hidden beside the space concealing the dock and her team's stasis pods. Your gear's in there, and I've authorized access to our stores catalog. Let me know if there's anything you need brought up. You're in credit with us to this amount, and I believe you need to update your invoice to include the day's work. Oliver opened his mouth to thank her, but she palmed the cabin door closed, and he found himself thanking a blank wall. Lewis snorted, shucking his dressing gown and sliding into the very narrow sand unit tucked at the end of the room. By the time he was done, Oliver had made a list. See what I've missed, he instructed before taking his turn in the sand. The one thing he hated about regen tanks was the way the fluid clung to his skin and caked his hair afterward. Okay, and he hated the confined space and being forcibly inactive, and he shoved the thought away, getting clean in record time and stepping out to find Lewis dressed and strapping on the new armor they'd just ordered. Almost done, his beater told him cheerfully, passing him his clothes. You can check me when you're finished. Oliver's wolf pricked its ears and curled its lips. Was his beater giving orders? Lewis didn't wait to be challenged. Instead, he pulled on the last piece of armor and picked up the gear bag that had been sitting alongside it. There's no room in here, boss. I'll wait outside the door. Oliver couldn't argue against that, so he let it go. His wolf snorted with disgruntlement and flopped down on its stomach, the feel of its fur brushing the underside of his skin. Oliver didn't have time to let his wild side loose. The hunt starts soon, he soothed it, and its mockery was his own. A she-cub. A human she-cub. The thought gave him pause, and Oliver hoped the booster's intel crew had had more luck with finding Aylin than he had. After all, the girl had vanished en route here. What the captain thought her people could find was beyond him. He finished dressing and getting the good quality lightweight armor on, trying not to wonder exactly where a freighter came by such things and why it would stock them in the first place. It's a freighter that does smuggling work for one of the most well-known smuggling organizations in the verse, he reminded himself. You don't think it has secrets to keep? And he added that to the list of things he wanted to find out. The captain was waiting for him to emerge. We found your girl, she told him, watching as Lewis handed him his loadout and then checked his kit. She's supervising the constructions of a Kukavor Alpha 9 sponsored coding academy and liaising with both Odyssey and the Vespus on a training center for ship crew. She cocked her head and asked her next question privately, across the comm line between their implants. Are you sure she's the right target? Oliver stilled, fixing her with a steady gaze. What? How? He gave an exasperated sigh. I never said she was our target. The captain smirked. Yes, but Nettles specifically asked us to transport their retrieval specialists, and you're asking about one Aelin star shadow. It's not hard to work out. Oliver groaned. Somehow he found it hard to believe Nettles had screwed up that badly. Are you sure you want us coming back to the ship if everything goes south down there? He asked, because it was starting to feel like one massive shitstorm just waiting to happen. The captain cocked her head. We choose our own risks, and we owe you. You need somewhere to run and you can reach us? We'll take you aboard. She didn't say what would happen if the pursuit caught up with them, so Oliver specified. If you can't get us away, don't risk the ship or your crew. Call in Odyssey. Her brow creased, and it was her turn to study him. Finally, she gave him a single curt nod. Understood. But if I can get you away without putting my crew in danger, I will. After that, you and I are going to talk. Deal, Oliver agreed, and she reached out and clapped him on the shoulder. Now that that's sorted, Mr. Landstrom, how open an entry do you want, and where would you like us to set you down? As she spoke, she passed him the files her team had gathered with the girl's location highlighted. Oliver passed them to Lewis, and they both took a minute to look them over. There, and covert, Oliver indicated, passing the captain the location and their decision. We could shuttle you down, but a teleport would be better, she decided, turning to one of the men who'd been standing quietly beside her. What do you think, Ardhav? Ardhav was 6 feet tall and leanly muscled. His gaze swept briefly over Oliver and Lewis before momentarily unfocusing as he assessed what the captain had passed him. Watching him, Oliver got the sense he was watching an operative, and one who'd been walking the sharp edge of things until not so long ago. It's a good insertion point, the man rumbled, and teleport would be best. If we time it for 0702, sunrise should obscure the flash. 0702, Oliver thought, and checked. The man had a point, and it had been something he hadn't considered. Oliver frowned. Ardhav, huh? He wondered what position the man held on the booster's squire. As if catching his thought, the man favored him with a quiet stare, his eyes shadowed as he watched his captain turn to Oliver. You have 3 hours to prepare before we make the drop, she told him. Ardhav will escort you to the mess and then to teleport. She paused and then held out her hand. I look forward to doing business with you, she added, as if they hadn't just concluded a deal. Before Oliver could contemplate what she meant, she turned and walked away. Ardhav spoke before he could call after her. This way,